The huge metal doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a loud hiss. Ambassador Zethkar walked inside, his blue skin pale with fear. His hand shook as he held the data pad containing the worst news the galaxy had ever heard. The council members from dozens of different worlds sat in their floating chairs, waiting to hear what had made the proud Althorian diplomat look so scared. Zethkar stepped up to the speaking platform in the center of the round room. His voice cracked when he began to talk. Honored council members, I bring terrible news from the Outer Rim. The Devourers have taken 3 more star systems, 12 billion lives, gone. A wave of shocked whispers filled the chamber. The crystalline delegate, her body made of living crystal, flickered with nervous light. The gas-based beings from Nebula 7 swirled faster in their containment suits. Even the ancient tree lords from the forest world of Verdania rustled their leaves in distress. How many ships did we lose? Asked Council Leader Morthak, his deep voice echoing through the room. All of them, Zethkar replied. The entire defense fleet. 200 ships and their crews simply absorbed. The Devourers took everything, the metal, the energy, even the organic matter. They used it all to make more of themselves. The council chamber fell silent. For 3 months, the mysterious enemy had been moving through space like a plague. They came without warning, consumed everything in their path, and left behind empty space where once there had been thriving worlds. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They just took everything and moved on to the next system. Captain Jake Morrison was eating lunch in the mess hall of the battlecruiser Titan's Edge when the message arrived. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Kelly Barnes, burst into the room with a look of confusion on her face. Captain, we're getting a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're asking to speak with Admiral Carter immediately. Jake put down his sandwich and followed Kelly to the bridge. The message was unlike anything Earth had ever received from the alien civilizations. Usually, the galactic species treated humans like children who had just learned to walk. They were polite but dismissive, treating Earth's military as a curiosity rather than a real force. This message was different. The alien diplomat on the screen looked desperate. His words were formal, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. 1. The leaders of the human military forces, the Galactic Council, requests immediate assistance. We face an enemy that threatens all life in the galaxy. Your unique military capabilities may be our only hope. Please respond with all possible speed. Jake stared at the screen for a long moment after the message ended. He turned to his communications. Officer. Kelly, send a copy of this to Luna Base immediately. Mark it as highest priority. 3 hours later, Admiral Lisa Carter sat in the war room deep beneath Luna Base, surrounded by the highest-ranking officers in the human military. The room was filled with the soft hum of computers and the quiet conversations of people trying to understand what they had just heard. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said General Patricia Stone, her voice sharp with disbelief. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy are asking us for help with a military problem? That's what it sounds like, Admiral Carter replied. She touched a button on the table and a holographic display showed the galactic map. Red dots marked the systems that had been destroyed. According to their data, this enemy has consumed 12 star systems in 3 months. They call them the Devourers. Colonel Ryan Torres leaned forward in his chair. What kind of weapons are we talking about? Energy-based attacks? Kinetic bombardment? Neither, said Dr. Eric Hoffman, the military's expert on alien technology. From what I can tell, they don't use weapons in any way we understand. They seem to break down matter at the molecular level and rebuild it into more of themselves. It's like they're turning entire planets into parts of their own bodies. The room fell quiet as everyone thought about what that meant. Finally, Admiral Carter spoke again. The galactic species have been at peace for thousands of years. Their military forces are designed for keeping order, not for total war. They use non-lethal weapons and focus on capturing enemies rather than destroying them. And that's not working against these Devourers, added General Stone. No, it's not. Every ship they send, every weapon they use, just becomes food for the enemy. They're making the problem worse every time they fight. Captain Morrison had been quiet during the briefing, but now he cleared his throat. Ma'am, are we seriously considering this? Going to war in space against an enemy we know nothing about? Admiral Carter looked around the room at the faces of her officers. Some looked excited, others worried, but all of them looked determined. Galactic civilizations have technology we can only dream of. Faster than light travel, energy shields, weapons that can destroy asteroids, but they've forgotten how to fight a real war. They've forgotten how to be brutal when brutality is necessary. She stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the lunar surface. Earth hung in the black sky like a blue marble. We haven't forgotten. Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We know how to destroy our enemies completely. We know how to sacrifice everything for victory. And right now, that might be exactly what the galaxy needs. General Stone nodded slowly. Task Force Omega? Task Force Omega, Admiral Carter confirmed. Our most classified units, our most dangerous weapons, our most experienced killers. If the galaxy wants humanity's help, they're going to get everything we have. Within hours, the message went out across all human colonies. The call for volunteers was answered before it was even officially announced. Soldiers, pilots, engineers, and scientists all wanted to be part of humanity's first real war among the stars. Captain Morrison returned to his ship with new orders. The Titan's Edge would be part of the largest human military force ever assembled. As he looked out at the stars, he wondered if humanity was ready for what was coming. The galaxy had called for help, and humanity was about to show them exactly what kind of help they provided. General Patricia Stone walked through the underground tunnels of Colorado Base, her boots echoing off the metal walls. The base had been built inside a mountain, hidden from the world above. This was where humanity kept its darkest secrets, its most dangerous weapons, and its deadliest soldiers. She stopped at a heavy door marked with warning signs in 12 different languages. Her handprint opened the lock, and she stepped into the war room where Task Force Omega was being planned. The room was filled with screens showing star maps, weapon specifications, and tactical data that would make even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. "Show me what we have," Stone said to Colonel Ryan Torres, who stood beside a holographic display of humanity's military assets. Torres touched a control, and the display showed dozens of ships floating in space near Jupiter. The Hellhound class. Destroyers are ready, ma'am. 50 ships, each one carrying enough firepower to level a continent. Nuclear torpedoes, kinetic bombardment systems, and experimental plasma cannons. Stone nodded, but her expression remained serious. What about the biological weapons? A younger officer, Captain Susan Wright, stepped forward with a data pad. We have 12 different strains ready for deployment, each one designed to break down organic matter at different rates. The aliens won't like it, but if these devourers are part biological, we might be able to poison their entire collective. The general moved to another display showing massive ships that looked more like floating fortresses than spacecraft. And the dreadnoughts? Admiral Ben Hayes will command from the Retribution, Torres replied. 2 kilometers long, armed with weapons that most species would consider war crimes. Railguns that can punch through moon-sized targets, antimatter torpedoes, and something the scientists are calling a matter disruptor. Stone raised an eyebrow. What does a matter disruptor do? Dr. Amy Walsh, the fleet's chief strategist, answered from across the room. It breaks the bonds between atoms, ma'am. Anything it hits simply stops existing. We've only tested it on asteroids, but the results were complete. The room fell quiet as everyone thought about what that meant. These were weapons that could erase entire cities from existence, tools that went far beyond anything the peaceful galactic civilizations had ever imagined. Torres brought up another display, this one showing smaller, faster ships. The corvettes are designed for hit-and-run attacks. They can appear out of nowhere, strike hard, and disappear before the enemy knows what happened. Captain Danny Brooks will lead the fighter squadrons. His pilots are all veterans from the colonial wars. Good, Stone said. What about the special operations teams? Major Chris Nelson, a man with scars across his face and hands, stood up from where he had been studying tactical reports. My teams are ready, General. We've trained for boarding actions against unknown alien technology, powered armor, plasma cutting tools, and enough explosives to crack a planet in half. Stone walked over to a wall covered with photographs of human soldiers from different conflicts throughout history. Ancient warriors with swords, soldiers from world wars with rifles, modern troops with energy weapons. The pictures told the story of humanity's long relationship with violence. The galactic species don't understand what we're offering them, she said quietly. They think war is about disabling your enemy, capturing their ships, negotiating for surrender. They fight to end conflicts with as little damage as possible. Dr. Walsh nodded. I've been studying their military reports, General. In their last major conflict 300 years ago, they managed to resolve everything with only 200 casualties across both sides. They consider that a terrible tragedy. Torres laughed, but there was no humor in it. 200 casualties? We lost more than that in a single training exercise last month. That's exactly my point, Stone continued. They've forgotten that sometimes you have to destroy your enemy completely. Sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice everything, including yourself, to win. She moved to the center of the room where a large screen showed intelligence reports from the front lines. The Devourers had taken another system while they were talking. Billions more lives lost. The enemy we're facing doesn't negotiate, Stone said. It doesn't take prisoners, it doesn't show mercy. It just consumes everything and moves on. The galactic forces keep trying to fight it with their peaceful methods, and they keep losing. Captain Wright looked up from her data pad. General, the alien liaison officers are asking about our rules of engagement. They want to know what limitations we'll follow, what targets we'll avoid. Stone was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked around the room at all the officers who would be leading humanity's deadliest military force into battle. Tell them we have one rule of engagement, she said. Win. The preparations continued around the clock. Ships were loaded, with weapons that had never been used in space combat. Soldiers trained for battles against enemies that might not follow any known laws of physics. Scientists worked on theoretical weapons designed to destroy things that shouldn't be able to exist. Commander Kevin Butler led a team developing something called quantum disruptors. If these Devourers share information across their collective, he explained to Stone during one briefing, then we need to find a way to jam that communication, cut them off from each other, make them confused and vulnerable. The work was dangerous. 3 researchers died when an experimental antimatter containment system failed. 2 pilots were lost when a new fighter design proved unstable during testing. But the work continued because everyone understood what failure would mean. Admiral Hayes arrived at Colorado Base to review the final preparations. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. He looked at the assembled fleet data and nodded slowly. The aliens asked for help, he said. They're about to learn what kind of help humanity provides. When we're done, either the Devourers will be destroyed completely, or there won't be anyone left to remember that they ever existed. The final orders went out to every human world. Task Force Omega would launch in 72 hours. The galaxy's most peaceful species had called for aid, and humanity was about to show them the true meaning of total war. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Captain Susan Wright gripped the arms of her command chair as the stars stopped streaking past the windows of her reconnaissance ship, the Shadowhawk. What she saw in the distance made her stomach turn cold. "Dear God," whispered Lieutenant Kelly Barnes from the sensor station. "Captain, you need to see this." Wright moved to the main display screen. The 3rd planet in the system, once a beautiful world covered in blue oceans and green continents, was now a writhing mass of black and red. Massive organic tubes stretched from the planet's surface into space, pumping something that looked like blood mixed with oil into waiting ships. "Are those things alive?" asked Commander Tony Garrett, who had joined them from the nearby vessel, Dark Matter. "I think so," Wright replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think they're eating the planet." The Devourer ships were unlike anything in human military databases. They weren't built from metal and plastic like human vessels. Instead, they appeared to be grown, like enormous sea creatures floating in the darkness of space. Their hulls pulsed with veins of light that moved like a heartbeat. Some ships were smooth and round like eggs, while others had long tentacles that reached out to touch nearby vessels. Wright activated her communication system. Admiral Hayes, this is Shadowhawk. We have visual contact with the enemy. The voice of Admiral Hayes crackled through the speaker from his flagship, the Retribution. What do you see, Captain? Sir, they're not just destroying the planet, they're digesting it. The entire world is being broken down and fed into their ships. I count at least 200 enemy vessels of various sizes. Understood. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. We go to battle stations immediately. This is not a rescue mission anymore. This is an extermination. The human fleet spread out into attack formation. 50 destroyer-class ships formed the front line. There, nuclear torpedoes armed and ready. Behind them, the massive dreadnoughts moved into position, their railguns charging with enough energy to punch holes through small moons. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier ships, their pilots eager for the first real space battle in human history. Colonel Danny Brooks led the fighter attack, his squadron of 30 ships diving toward the enemy like angry wasps. All pilots, remember your training. These things are alive, so aim for what looks like vital organs. If you see something that pulses or glows, shoot it. The first human weapons to hit the Devourers were kinetic missiles fired from the destroyer Valkyrie. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez watched her missiles streak across space and slam into the side of a large enemy ship. The impact tore a huge hole in the organic hull, and green fluid sprayed out like blood. Direct hit, Rodriguez shouted. The target is damaged but still moving. That was when the Devourers noticed the human fleet. The organic ships began to move, turning toward the attackers with a speed that seemed impossible for their size. Tentacles that had been feeding on the planet suddenly whipped through space, reaching toward the human ships like the arms of an angry octopus. Evasive maneuvers, Admiral Hayes commanded. All ships, open fire. The space around Kepler 442 erupted in violence. Human railguns fired solid metal slugs at incredible speed, tearing through Devourer ships like bullets through paper. Nuclear torpedoes exploded in brilliant flashes of light, vaporizing chunks of enemy vessels. Plasma cannons sent streams of superheated gas that burned through organic hulls. But the Devourers fought back in ways that made even veteran soldiers afraid. Their ships didn't just shoot weapons. They released clouds of small organisms that flew through space like living bullets. When these creatures hit human ships, they began eating through the metal hulls, trying to get inside. Commander Kevin Butler watched in horror from his research vessel Prometheus as one of the human fighters was swarmed by these organisms. The small ship's hull began to dissolve, and the pilot's screams echoed over the radio before cutting off suddenly. Captain Wright, are you seeing this? Butler called over the communication system. I see it, Wright replied from the Shadowhawk, which was now flying through the middle of the battle. They're not just fighting us, they're trying to eat us. The battle continued for hours. Human ships used every weapon they had, from conventional explosives to experimental energy weapons. The Devourers responded by releasing more and more organisms, some as small as bacteria, others as large as fighters. The space around the planet became a soup of destruction, filled with pieces of destroyed ships from both sides. Major Chris Nelson led a boarding party onto a damaged Devourer ship. His team wore sealed armor and carried weapons designed to work in zero gravity. What they found inside the enemy vessel was beyond their worst nightmares. The whole ship is alive, Nelson reported over the radio. The walls are made of some kind of flesh. There are organs everywhere, pumping fluids through tubes, and there are things moving around in here. What kind of things? Asked Admiral Hayes. I don't know, sir. They look like a cross between machines and insects. They're rebuilding the damage we caused, but they're using pieces of our ships to do it. This was the discovery that changed everything. The Devourers weren't just destroying human ships. They were learning from them, taking the technology and making it part of themselves. Every weapon humans used, every tactic they tried became information that the enemy could use to become stronger. Captain Wright watched through her sensors as a Devourer ship that had been nearly destroyed suddenly began to change. Its hull, reformed, but now it had what looked like human armor plating. When it fired back at the human fleet, its weapons looked suspiciously similar to human railguns. Admiral, Wright called urgently. They're adapting. They're using our own technology against us. The battle was far from over. But one thing was already clear. The Devourers weren't just another enemy that could be defeated with superior firepower. They were something that learned from every attack, grew stronger from every battle, and became more dangerous with every passing moment. Humanity had brought its most lethal weapons to fight monsters from beyond the stars. Now they were learning that sometimes the monsters could fight back. The human fleet pulled back to the outer edge of the Kepler 442 system, their ships damaged and their crews shaken. Admiral Hayes stood in the command center of the Retribution, staring at the tactical display that showed the enemy forces growing, stronger by the hour. The Devourers had absorbed the wreckage from the battle and were now building new ships using human technology. "Sir, we lost 12 ships in that engagement," reported Captain Susan Wright over the communication system. "But the enemy has gained 30 new vessels. They're literally eating our dead ships and turning them into more of themselves." Hayes clenched his fists. The first battle had been a disaster, but not in the way anyone expected. The human weapons had worked perfectly, destroying dozens of enemy ships. The problem was that every destroyed ship became raw material for the Devourers to build more ships. "All ship commanders, report to the Retribution for emergency briefing," Hayes ordered. "We need a new plan." Within hours, the surviving captains had gathered in the Admiral's war room. The mood was dark, but not defeated. These were soldiers who had fought in the colonial wars, officers who understood that sometimes you had to lose battles to win wars. Major Chris Nelson was the first to speak. "Admiral, I've been thinking about what we saw inside that Devourer ship. They're not just copying our technology, they're improving it." "What do you mean?" asked Colonel Danny Brooks, whose fighter squadron had lost half its pilots in the battle. Nelson activated a holographic display showing the internal structure of the enemy vessel his team had boarded. "Look at this. They took our railgun design and made it 20% more efficient. They studied our armor plating and created something that's both stronger and lighter. They're not just learning from us, they're learning faster than us." The room fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. Fighting the Devourers with conventional tactics would only make them stronger. Every battle would teach them more about human technology and strategy. Dr. Rachel Martinez, who had been studying tissue samples from the enemy, raised her hand. "Admiral, I think I know why they're so good at adapting. They're not individual creatures. They're all connected through some kind of quantum field. When one ship learns something, they all learn it instantly. Like a hive mind," said Commander Kevin Butler. "Exactly. But I found something interesting. The quantum connection has a specific frequency. If we could disrupt that frequency across a large enough area, we might be able to cut them off from each other." Admiral Hayes leaned forward. "How large an area?" "At least several light minutes. We'd need to generate a massive quantum interference field. The problem is I don't know how to create something that powerful." Captain Tony Garrett, commander of the experimental ship Dark Matter, stood up slowly. "I might know a way." All eyes turned to him. Garrett was known for taking impossible risks, but he was also one of the most innovative officers in the human fleet. "My ship is powered by controlled antimatter reactions," he explained. "If we could overload the containment system in a specific way, we might be able to create a quantum explosion large enough to disrupt their communications across the entire system." "That would destroy your ship," Hayes said quietly. "Yes, sir. It would destroy everything within several million kilometers, including most of our fleet if we're not careful about positioning." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Hayes spoke again. "What you're suggesting is a suicide mission." "Yes, sir. But it might be the only way to stop them." While the officers debated strategy, the battle for Kepler 442 continued. The Devourers had finished consuming the planet and were now building a massive structure in space. It looked like a combination of factory and nursery, pumping out new ships at an alarming rate. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, commanding the cruiser Valkyrie, led a small group of ships in hit-and-run attacks against the enemy construction. Her strategy was simple but effective. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and get out before they could adapt. "All ships, remember the new rules," she broadcast to her squadron. "No two attacks can be the same. If we used missiles last time, we use railguns this time. If we attacked from above, we attack from below. Keep them guessing. The human ships began to fight in ways that went against everything they had been taught. Instead of using their most effective weapons repeatedly, they constantly changed tactics. Instead of following successful strategies, they abandoned them after a single use. It was wasteful and inefficient, but it worked. The Devourers couldn't adapt to tactics that were never used twice. Every time they learned to counter a human attack, the humans had already moved on to something completely different. Sergeant Peter Kane led a boarding party onto another enemy ship, but this time they weren't there to gather intelligence. They were there to plant experimental weapons that would work in ways the Devourers had never seen before. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy this ship," Kane told his team as they cut through the organic hull. "We're trying to confuse it. Plant the viral programs in their computer systems if they have computer systems. Set the biological weapons to activate randomly. Make them think their own bodies are attacking them." The mission was successful, but the cost was high. Kane lost half his team getting back to their ship, and the enemy vessel exploded in a way that suggested it had gone insane rather than simply being destroyed. Back on the Retribution, Admiral Hayes made the hardest decision of his career. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. We're implementing Protocol 7. Total war, no rules, no mercy, and no repeated tactics. We're going to fight these things in ways they can't predict, because we're not going to be predictable." The new phase of the battle began immediately. Human ships started using tactics that seemed insane. They rammed enemy vessels at high speed, detonated nuclear weapons inside their own ships to create massive explosions, and even used biological weapons designed to attack the organic components of Devourer ships. Dr. Martinez's team released clouds of engineered bacteria that ate through the enemy's living hulls. Major Nelson's Special Forces teams began using weapons that worked randomly, making it impossible for the Devourers to develop countermeasures. The strangest part was that it was working. The enemy ships began to show signs of confusion, making tactical errors and failing to coordinate their attacks properly. The hive mind that made them so dangerous was becoming a weakness when they couldn't trust the information they were sharing with each other. Captain Garrett began preparing his ship for the ultimate sacrifice, knowing that his antimatter explosion might be the key to winning the entire war. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the tactical display that showed the final phase of humanity's desperate plan. The Kepler 442 star was already showing signs of instability, as human engineering teams worked frantically to complete the stellar manipulation device. They had maybe 6 hours before the star would explode in a controlled supernova that would destroy everything in the system. "All civilian evacuation ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he broadcast across all frequencies. "You have 4 hours to reach minimum safe distance. Any ship that cannot make it out in time should transfer its passengers to faster vessels immediately." Captain Julie Foster commanded the largest evacuation ship, the Sanctuary, which was packed with Althorian refugees who had escaped the planet before the Devourers consumed it. Her ship was slow and heavily loaded, but she pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. "Come on, you piece of junk," Foster muttered at her ship's controls. "Just a few more hours, don't fail me now." Behind her, the space around Kepler 442 had become a nightmare of destruction. The Devourers had realized what the humans were planning and had launched every ship they had in a massive counterattack. Hundreds of organic vessels swarmed toward the human fleet like angry insects. Commander Steve Murphy and his engineering team worked inside the star itself, protected by the most advanced heat shields humanity had ever built. The stellar manipulation device was almost complete, but the work was incredibly dangerous. 3 engineers had already died when their protective suits failed in the intense heat. "Admiral, this is Murphy," came the crackling voice over the radio. "The device is ready, but we need 20 more minutes to reach safe distance." "You have 15 minutes, Hayes replied. "After that, the Devourers will overrun our position." The final battle was unlike anything that had ever happened in space. Human ships threw themselves at the enemy with complete abandon, knowing that none of them would survive the coming explosion. Their only goal was to buy time for the evacuation ships and the engineering team. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez piloted the cruiser Valkyrie straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Her ship's weapons fired continuously as devourer organisms swarmed over her hull like living acid. "This is Valkyrie," she broadcast calmly. "My ship is compromised, detonating all nuclear warheads in 10 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you all." The explosion that followed vaporized a dozen enemy ships and cleared a path for the slower human vessels to escape. Rodriguez and her crew of 200 people died instantly, but their sacrifice saved thousands of others. Major Chris Nelson led the last boarding party of the war, taking his team into the largest devourer ship to plant a virus that would disrupt their quantum communications. They fought their way through corridors filled with hostile organisms, using weapons that set everything around them on fire. "Nelson to all ships," he reported, as his team reached the ship's core. "We're in position. Uploading the virus now. Tell my wife I love her." The virus spread through the devourer network like poison, causing ships to turn on each other and making their coordinated attacks fall apart. Nelson and his team were consumed by the ship's defenses, but their final mission succeeded. Sergeant Peter Kane held a critical position near the star's manipulation device, fighting off waves of small devourer organisms that were trying to damage the equipment. He had been wounded 3 times but refused to abandon his post. "You want this star?" Kane shouted at the creatures as he fired his plasma rifle. "Come and take it." He fought alone for the final 10 minutes, his armor systems failing one by one. When the evacuation order came, Kane was found still standing at his post, surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of enemy organisms. He had died with his finger on the trigger. Lieutenant Carol Adams was the last fighter pilot in space when the evacuation order came. Her ship was damaged and her weapons were empty, but she saw one final opportunity to help. A massive devourer command ship was trying to destroy the evacuation vessels. "This is Adams," she said over the radio. "I'm going to ram that command ship. Take care of my little brother." Adams pointed her fighter directly at the enemy vessel and pushed her engines to maximum power. The impact was small compared to the size of the command ship, but it hit exactly the right spot. The enemy vessel lost power and drifted helplessly as the evacuation ships escaped. Captain Tony Garrett made the final sacrifice. His ship, Dark Matter, flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation as the star began to collapse. The antimatter explosion created a quantum shockwave that spread across the entire system, cutting every devourer ship off from the collective consciousness. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," came the final transmission. "The stellar manipulation is successful. Quantum disruption is spreading. Mission accomplished." The artificial supernova that followed was visible from 50 light-years away. The explosion destroyed the star, the planets, and every ship in the system. But the quantum shockwave it created spread much further, disrupting devourer communications across dozens of systems. Captain Susan Wright, now commanding the surviving human forces from her ship Shadowhawk, received reports from across the galaxy. Cut off from their hive mind, individual devourer ships became confused and vulnerable. Galactic defense forces, following the brutal tactics learned from humans, began systematic cleanup operations. "Admiral Hayes, this is Wright," she broadcast, knowing there would be no reply. "The devourers are retreating from 17 systems. The galaxy is safe. Your sacrifice was not in vain." 6 months later, Ambassador Helen Ross stood before the Galactic Council, representing what remained of humanity's military forces. The war had cost them 90% of their fleet and millions of their best soldiers. "The threat has been eliminated," she reported to the assembled aliens. "But the cost was higher than any of us imagined. Humanity proved that sometimes civilization must be saved by those willing to destroy everything, including themselves." The memorial built for the Kepler 442 operation covered an entire moon. Every name of every human who died was carved into black stone, with a simple message above them all. They answered when the galaxy called for help. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but they had done it by showing everyone exactly how brutal and ruthless they could be. The other species now looked at humans with a mixture of gratitude and fear, knowing that the same people who had saved them could just as easily destroy them. The galaxy was safe, but it would never forget the price of that safety.